Good morning, everybody. We are going to get started. Thank you all for coming. It's good to see you. I'm Troy Swanson, the Library Department Chair, and this is our final lecture in our STEM series for the fall. This series is really put together by Keith Knabb, and he could not be here today in the math department, but they do really good work emphasizing different careers and thinking in terms of the science, technology, engineering, mathematics fields. So this is the last one. So thank you for coming, and thanks to the math department and Keith for organizing this, and I will introduce our speaker. Maria Schiopu is a quantitative analyst who provides hedging services for mutual funds at Milliman Financial Risk Management. She graduated with a degree in mathematics from Northwestern University and a certificate in financial economics from the Kellogg School of Management. I want to thank her for her time. She just flew in today, this morning, from Atlanta with her luggage, like literally came from airport to us. So I appreciate her fitting us in her schedule and giving us of her time. So with that, here's Maria. Thank you.
Thank you. So can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, just so you're all aware, I got about 3 hours of sleep last night. I had to wake up at 4. It's been a long day so far. So I'm really very flattered to have been invited for this. It's really quite a nice honor. And I'll tell you about my story. I'll tell you about actuarial science. I'll tell you about all the wonderful things that we can do by using math and kind of combining that with a lot of creativity, honestly, to answer problems that our society really needs to answer in order to prosper. And I will, I'll tell you a little bit about my my educational background. I think you'll find that I'm very similar to many of you, which is maybe a little bit surprising. And I'll tell you about the things that I do currently. So, this is my background. Like Troy was saying, I have a degree in math. It's pure math. I never went to an actuarial program at school. At Northwestern, we actually did not have one. So I mostly studied math. My focus was in stochastic processes and abstract algebra. If anyone knows those things, they're wonderful things to study. And then in my last year, actually, because I had finished all of my math courses and I had essentially a math degree, I had the opportunity to study at the Kellogg School of Management, which is the business school at Northwestern. It really is one of the best business schools, I would say, in the U.S. And they offer this small certificate program only for undergraduates that are currently enrolled at Northwestern, and you can kind of pick if you want to do the managerial side of an MBA or if you want to do the finance side. I picked the finance side, and that was one of the best programs that I've ever participated in. If any of you are considering Northwestern as a place to further your undergraduate career after you're finished with Moraine, then absolutely let me know, and I will talk to you. I will talk your ear off about this one. But so let me take myself back about 5 or 6 years. And actually, when I first started as an undergrad, in my freshman year, I was at a community college. I was at Wilbur Wright College, which is, I think, a much smaller college than yours. It's somewhere on the northwest side of Chicago. It's part of the Chicago City Colleges. It was a pretty good school, and I think all of the things that I learned there are probably available to you here as well. And you have a much more beautiful campus. So really looking at what you're getting here, I think you have a much better start than I did. Really, you have a lot of resources here on campus, and I really encourage you to try to use them as best you can. At least so far, I've met 2 of your professors. They're awesome. So I currently work in the portfolio management group at Milliman. Milliman's, I would say a global leader in actuarial consulting. We're not the biggest actuarial consulting firm out there, but we are generally considered to be the most sophisticated. So I've been full-time with Milliman since 2013, which is after I graduated from Northwestern. Before that, I actually had 2 internships at Milliman, so I've technically been with them since 2011. Particularly in my senior year, I worked in our office about 2 or 3 days a week. So that's something that really contributed to my career, my integration in our office, like way before I ended up being a full-time hire. I'll talk to you about internships a lot. I cannot emphasize how important internships are for actuaries. What I do is I design and implement investment and hedging strategies for mutual funds. I know that sounds complicated, but it's a very pretty typical thing that actuaries do. It's definitely new. In fact, our fund services initiative, we launched that in 2011. So prior to 2011, we had no clients, no assets under management. When I started full-time in 2013, we had about 25 billion of assets and several funds in the market. That was pretty exciting. And nowadays, we're north of 75 billion. And we're getting there towards about 100 funds, I think. So we're pretty proud of our group and what we've achieved in the market, really. Okay, so what are actuaries? This, literally, I went yesterday to the Society of Actuaries webpage. This is the homepage. Can you see that title? That's the first thing that appears on the main hub on the internet that talks about actuaries. Nobody knows what actuaries do. They're still trying to figure it out. So I think maybe part of the reason why people don't know what actuaries do is because we tend to answer that by saying that we solve difficult problems and we employ this wide variety of skills like quantitative analysis and predictive modeling and financial engineering, and I could go down this list. Do you know any of those words? It's kind of hard. These are big words. They're all English words. But I think it's a very opaque way of explaining what we do. We do use all of these things. We do a lot of business development. We do a lot of data management. Data management has been really kind of the driving thing in the past few years. Trying to figure out what to do with all this data is very, very important. So I personally work a lot with financial engineering. That's just the nature of the service that I provide for our clients. So all of these are valid things to say about actuaries. They're just really opaque. So in simpler words, we try to answer difficult questions. So think about an insurance company that would like to sell car insurance. I think that's a very typical product. It's probably about the most basic thing that you could think of. And they're trying to figure out how much do they charge for car insurance? How much should you charge to be competitive, but to cover your costs and make some profit? Can you give some people discounts? How much can you discount, various people? What are the things that you need to look at to do that? And then once you actually have that, you got to figure out how much capital you need to put aside to make sure that you're able to cover all of those costs in the future, because all of these people that now you just sold car insurance to will have accidents that you'll have to pay for. In a slightly different field, pension actuaries do a lot of work, and pensions are one of those things that you have to be very socially responsible about. People's livelihood really does depend on it. So one of the things that you could try to figure out is how can you take a pension fund and invest the assets of that pension fund such that you're not overexposing the pension beneficiaries to a lot of risk or to major losses. Those can be very, very detrimental to a pension plan and its beneficiaries. Another thing that's maybe a little bit newer that actuaries do, particularly I would say probably health and medical insurance, things have taken off tremendously in the past 5 years, I would say maybe. And in the past maybe it wasn't quite as much of a worry to us, but it's really one of the fields that's become very, very relevant, and it's probably one of the fastest growing as well. So how can you figure out which medical procedures you should cover? Right, there are some medical procedures that you need to cover because they're just basic care that you have to make sure that your insureds have access to. But then maybe there are some procedures that are wasteful, and when you cover them, people just tend to do those procedures and not really have better experience later in life and not really improve their health. So how do you figure all of these things out? Well, actuaries figure these things out. So the next thing I really want to talk about is some common misconceptions about actuaries. These are some of the things we don't do. We do not work with birds. We don't underwrite insurance. We cannot predict when any one of you in particular will die. That's not what we do. Not now. We don't, sit at our desks and work on our calculators all day and solve integrals. That's not really what we do. We kind of build a lot of complicated models that can do all that calculation for us, and we're not sitting there trying to solve probability puzzles all the time. And this last one is really kind of a joke that gets thrown around all the time. That actuaries are accountants, but they just didn't have the personality for it. They really tried it, but it didn't work. And then another thing that I tried again yesterday, as I was preparing this, I tried going to Google and just typing in actuaries are and see what the suggestions are going to be. So apparently we're evil, boring, but we're also kind of smart, maybe, totally overpaid, but maybe we're hot. That could be cool. We have that going for us, right? So there's a lot of misconceptions about actuaries, and I'm really hoping that the things that I tell you today will try to clear up the picture. And if you have any questions, please just stop me, raise your hand. I'm more than happy to answer questions. Okay. So here are some of the reasons why I think an actuarial career is a really, really good career. So part of it is it's actually very rewarding work. What we do ensures that really vital systems in our society work. So for example, try to imagine what it would be like if nobody ever had, there was no such thing as car insurance. So whenever you went driving, you maybe, hopped in your car to come over to class and maybe listen to my speech. You're exposing yourself every single day to a loss of $10,000, $20,000, depending on what car you have, obviously. And there's nothing you can do to pay for it. So if you ever get in an accident and your car gets totaled, you're in the hole for $10,000 every single time. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing any other people can do about it. That would be really catastrophic to our society. It's hard to imagine because we have these things, we've had these services around for such a long time. But there is a time in the past when these things were not available, and people were exposed to so much more downward mobility. Downward mobility in society is kind of being exposed to really kind of falling in status in society. So going from someone who's middle class to, say, someone who's homeless and poor because maybe you had a loss or an accident. So those are some of the things that insurance tries to fix for us. Another way you can think of insurance is as a wealth transfer. So let's say we're talking about property insurance. Let's say you own a house and you want to make sure that, if your house burns down, you're not left homeless, basically. So let's say, let's say you pay for property insurance for about 50 years. So what you're doing is every year for 50 years, you put aside a small amount of money, I don't know what property insurance costs, but let's say it's $500 every year that you're paying for your property insurance. So what you're essentially doing by buying that insurance is, let's say 50 of those years, you live in the house for 50 years, and 49 of those years are perfectly fine, but the 1 year when you have a fire, life doesn't look that good. So what you're doing, essentially, you're putting aside $500 every year, and you're transferring it to yourself, to that self who has to deal with a burnt down house. That's another thing that's really, kind of a good way to look at insurance and a good way to understand why insurance is important. Okay, the other thing that I really love about actuarial work, and this depends on kind of what level of actuarial work you do, but I really think of it as a creative process. A lot of the time we actually have to answer questions that have never been answered before. Believe it or not, actually, Milliman, because we're a leader in the industry, we often have to answer those questions. We are the people that governments come to, that huge multinational companies come to when they have a problem and they don't know how to fix it. That's pretty impressive. Now, even though that is true, I definitely consider actuarial work to be a pretty low-stress job. Most actuaries are pretty laid-back people. They're very friendly. They don't like to look you in the eye, or like that's really intimidating. But they're generally pretty happy people. And if you look at any surveys about job satisfaction, you'll generally find that actuaries are pretty happy with their job. Now, I do have a caveat on this one. There are so many insurance companies, so many consulting companies, so many disciplines where you can work as an actuary. You can do, like I said, car insurance pricing, or you can help casinos in Vegas figure out where to put their slot machines so that people spend more pennies, or something like that. So that there's a very varied array of services that you could provide as an actuary. The point is that you have to find the right service and the right company and the right group to work with that suits your strengths. If you're not in the right group, you'll often find yourself miserable because you feel that your job is maybe boring, or you're not doing the things that are challenging to you, or maybe things are too challenging. All of those things will happen. If you find yourself in that situation, don't give up on actuarial science. You're still in a good field. You still have a lot of opportunity in front of you. And if you've already kind of put a lot of time to become an actuary, it would be really a shame to just throw that out the door because you're unhappy with your coworkers. And that'll happen. It'll happen. For example, I work in a consulting firm. I don't think I'd be happy at an insurance company. I think I would find that boring. I don't think that I would feel as challenged as I do now. I really love working with clients. I love talking to people and trying to fix specific problems for specific people. Now, insurance actuaries do that too, but they don't have a contact with their end client. So for me, that's not as motivating. It's much easier for me to be motivated when I know who is benefiting directly from the things that I do. Okay, my second to last point on this is you can really, sorry, go ahead.
I just had a question. You're discussing some of the projects you're working on. Can you be a little more specific? Like anything recently that was big and interesting?
A lot of things are big and interesting. We do, so essentially what we do is we have an array of mutual funds where people can invest money to save for their retirement. And what you want to do with those funds is you want to make sure that those funds are not exposing their investors to too much risk, and that they're properly allocated such that large losses are unlikely. So one of the last things that I've worked on is figuring out a new way to implement that and to bring that to a new field, basically. It's hard to talk about these things without getting too technical. So I'll maybe, like, if you really want to hear more about it, I would love to talk to you one-on-one, and I'll tell you all about actual securities trading and and all of those good things. But I feel, actually, I'm kind of curious. Does anyone in the room have any experience? Could you identify actual securities that are traded in the market? One person, fantastic. Yeah, so it's kind of it's very specialized work. Okay, so I'll talk to you later. Okay. So one of the things that I feel is really, really important for actuaries is that you can drive your own progress very independently, because we have the certification process where you can take all of these exams, and that there's an outside entity that allows you to opine on actuarial things, which is really important. That kind of really gives you the legal power to perform as an actuary and to perform these services. That's very, very important, because you don't depend on anyone to take those exams. You can take those. I studied for those exams in my free time. They're really, really interesting exams. You can study for them on your own. There are lots of study materials out there, and we'll go through a lot of that. And it's really something that you can do. Like I was, just earlier I was talking to Troy about this. But say you're in a different field. Say you want to be a lawyer. really the only thing you can do to become a lawyer is go to law school. You need that law degree, which is going to cost you a lot of money, and it's going to take a long time. And even after that, you have to pass your bar exam, and so it's a very lengthy process that you can't really do in increments. The actuarial exams you can do in small increments. You can take one exam, you can take a couple exams, you can get some internships, you can get some work experience, and you don't have to take 6 years or 10 years, or usually exams take about 10 years, I think, for people, but you don't have to study for 10 years before you can actually do any work. Yes.
How many exams that I need to get an internship, because an internship is very important for actually.
Yes, it is.
So how many exams, at least how many exams that I need to get an internship?
Should I repeat the question for the room? So she's asking how many exams are necessary before you can get an internship as an actuary. Internship, again, I will go through this later. You guys are way ahead of me. Internships are very important. I know people who have gotten internships without taking any exams. That used to be a thing that they did in the past. It's not done so much anymore. Most of the time, people will need to take 1 or 2 exams. When I had my first internship, I had 2 exams passed. But I do think 2 exams are a little bit special. Kind of having walked into the interview room with 2 exams passed, they looked at me as being, a little bit above the fray. So 2 exams is fantastic. With 1 exam, you can definitely get internships. There are definitely internships that you will be very seriously considered for with 1 exam. So the last point that I really wanted to make here is, because you can do all these things on your own, this happens to be a really, really good career for women, and I'm very happy to see that there's a lot of girls here. Most of the time, I feel that in STEM fields, we kind of have a really, really hard time getting girls through the door. It's still something that we're working on. I think as a society and in general, I think American universities are really doing a good job of making that progress work and happen. But actuarial firms are actually very, very well suited for women. They've actually made a lot of effort to make sure that the work environment and the benefits that you receive as a working actuary are in fact appropriate for women. I think that's pretty special. Not a lot of industries can say that. Okay, and then the final and pretty important thing is that your efforts are generally appreciated and you get rewarded like pretty well. Okay, but like how well? So this is I don't know if any of you are familiar with D.W. Simpson, but they are probably one of the biggest recruiting companies out there that work specifically for actuaries. So what they do is they help a lot of actuaries get jobs, which means they have a lot of data on salaries. So they compile this actuarial salary survey. I think they do this once a year. This was the 2014 one. And what you can see here is, depending on how many exams you've taken before you actually apply for a full-time entry-level position, your salary will generally vary somewhere between, 55 and what's that upper bound, like $62,000, which is pretty good. But then you can also see that actually there's plenty of people that get right up there around 70. So even with 2 exams, there are plenty of people that start a full-time job with $70,000. Bonuses, that would be the red line. And actually bonuses are, on average, pretty low for just entry-level people. But it does depend a lot. As you can tell, it kind of goes from close to a 0 to about $10,000 or $11,000, which is also pretty significant. And then another thing that's really important to consider is your outlook for lifetime earnings. It's all good and great if you start with a good salary, but can you maintain that? Is that going to grow throughout your career? Well, apparently it does. So there are plenty of people who've been actuaries for 20 years, 30 years, who make pretty impressive sums. So on average, they're somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 a year. But then you can absolutely see that there are a couple of people, this is just for the past year, but there are a couple of people who have managed to make about $500,000 with, less than 20 years of experience. That's pretty impressive. Another point that's really important to notice on this graph is if you kind of look at all those lines and you try to figure out when all of those people kind of cross the 100,000 mark in their career, you will notice that that's usually before they hit 5 years of experience. So I think that's pretty impressive. What that means is that if you graduate from your undergrad degree when you're like 22, maybe 23, maybe you're a little bit older. Some of you, I'm sure, are a little bit older, but I also see some very young faces here. So, let's say you're starting your actuarial career when you're, before you hit 25. What that means is that most likely by the time you're 30, you'll be earning 100K. So, hopefully that got some of you interested, right? Okay. So here are some of the things that you can do, to get yourself on your way to becoming an actuary. They're pretty basic things. I imagine you probably thought about some of these yourself. So the first thing you want to do is you want to get an undergrad degree, but then you want to do some stuff while you're getting that degree too. So I have a math degree. I have people that I work with who have an econ degree or a finance degree. I even have someone who has a public policy degree, which you wouldn't think that's particularly actuarial, but he's doing a fantastic job, and he's one of the people that I work with the most, actually, in our group. There's also these things called actuarial science programs. So one of the best, actually, that you probably have available to you, given that you're in Chicago or around Chicago, is the U of I program. They have an excellent, absolutely excellent actuarial science program. We hire so many people that finish that program. It's unbelievable. There are just dozens and dozens of people in our office who've been to U of I, and they do amazing work. So it's also, U of I is probably a really good option if you're considering costs. I think some of your other options, if you really want to go for an actuarial science program in this area, would be like, I think Roosevelt and Loyola both have them. I think those are both, I don't know any figures or anything like that, but I think both of those are significantly more expensive to go to than U of I. Okay, the next point, obviously, take the exams. Take them early. I would say try not to finish your undergrad with less than 2 exams. If you have 2 exams, you'll be fine. As you saw in the graph, people make pretty good money with starting out with 2 exams too. But I can tell you from personal experience, it gets so much harder passing exams once you're actually working. You have no idea how much free time you have right now. This is the time to try to take the exams. I started my full-time, I think I probably mentioned this like 5 times. I started my full-time career with 3 exams passed. Currently, I have 4, and it's been 2 years. In the meantime, I've also taken a CFA exam, so stuff has happened, and I've been working a lot, but you do not realize how little time you have left when you're working full-time to actually go home and dive into these topics, and they're pretty hard exams. So it really try to take advantage of the time that you have now. I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, the next thing, which has already been brought up, of course, is actuarial internships. Try to do a variety of actuarial internships. I did 2 different disciplines. I found that to be very, very important. You can kind of pick and choose what you do. Try, if you started out and you did an internship and you're kind of thinking about what to do next year, try to go to a different company. Unless you really love your company. I went to the same. I've been with Milliman, ever since I got my first grown-up job. So, if you really love your company, stay, obviously. But if you're maybe a little ambivalent and you're maybe not quite sure, what else is out there, try other things. It's only a summer. Internships look fantastic on resumes, especially if they're, if they're pretty interesting internships with pretty good companies. A lot of companies hire interns for various things. So try to do a couple of things. You'll figure out if you like it or not. You should, after you've been working at it for 3 months, after you're done for a summer, you should be able to say, I like this or I don't like this. Okay? It's a really good way to build professional experience, even if later on you don't end up being an actuary. So say you take 2 internships when you're an undergrad, but then you just don't like it that much. It's, that's not the thing for you. And you go into something else, whatever that may be. Looking at someone's resume, if you see that they've done some actuarial work, but you're in a field that doesn't require quite as much quantitative work, you're very likely to consider that person a good candidate. Even though they did not maybe succeed at being an actuary, they probably did some pretty heavy stuff. There's a lot of heavy lifting that goes around in actuarial internships, and I don't mean that literally, obviously. So it's always something good to see on resumes. Particularly, even actuarial firms sometimes hire people for non-actuarial jobs. And it's really good to see that someone has that experience. Okay? And the last 2 things that are very important is try to build a network of peers. I don't know if you have an actuarial club here. If you don't, just start it. It doesn't take that much effort. And it's so much easier to study for exams when you have a couple of people who have gone through them, who understand them, someone to just study problems with every once in a while. It's really good to know people who are going through the same experience. You learn a lot from each other. You learn a lot about different companies. Maybe you go and you take internships at different companies, and you'll have that experience and you'll have that evidence, that firsthand evidence, that maybe a company's like really good to work for, and maybe you'll try for their internship next year. Okay? And then the last and very important thing, and you probably cannot imagine how important this is for your long-term career, try to find mentors. Mentors are some of the most influential people that you'll have in your life ever. These people change literally the course of your life. So try to just talk to real actuaries. When you're doing internships, even if it's not your field, even if you're not happy with what you're doing and you decide it's not for the long term, try to keep in touch with those people. You don't know when they might move to a different company, or you might kind of revise your goals. Try to keep in touch with those people. Make a good impression. Make sure that when anyone goes back to a former employer of yours, that employer will say good things about you. I cannot emphasize how important that is. Okay? All right, so the actual exams. This may take a while. I don't just mean because the internet is slow. Okay, so essentially, in your path to becoming an actuary, there are several things that you can attain. The lowest certification that you can attain is an ASA. I'll note before we go into this that this applies to the Society of Actuaries. There's another casualty actuarial society that's roughly equivalent, but they work with like property and casualty insurance, so they work with like car insurance, malpractice, that kind of stuff. We work more with kind of financial products, life insurance, annuities are a big one. Does anyone here know what annuities are? Or am I throwing strange words out there? So annuities are sort of kind of like a pension, where you buy an annuity product, and the person you bought that from, takes your money, invests it into some stuff, and then they pay you a fixed amount or a variable amount. There's lots of annuities out there. Like I said, actuaries are very creative. And then they pay you, a certain amount for many years in the future. So a lot like a pension. Okay, so for people in this field, if you're thinking about property and casualty, if you have your eyes set on like State Farm or Allstate or one of those guys, this largely applies. There are a couple of differences. There are a couple of different exams, but the path is very, very similar. So, just if you want to talk more about it, we can absolutely go through a little bit more detail if that's your interest. I'm probably going to be here, well after 12. So, if anyone has questions and they want to talk about something on one-on-one, I'm definitely here. I can help you maybe. Okay, so these are the preliminary requirements for the ASA. These three things, these are all exams. These are the first two exams, which are the easiest. You're going to have the easiest time taking these exams. You should start with these two. You're going to have a very hard time progressing to these if you haven't passed P and FM. So P is a probability exam. That's traditionally the number one exam. I took that the first. I definitely found FM to be significantly easier. FM doesn't involve that much calculus. So maybe that's one thing to consider. I think nowadays a lot of people just take FM first and then move on to P. That's perfectly fine. FM is financial mathematics. So FM is mostly about time value of money. So how can you value an amount of money that you're about to receive in the future? How do you figure out what that's worth to you today? That's essentially what that is. And it's really interesting stuff. It applies a lot to insurance, and it applies a lot to annuities. Like I mentioned before, it's pretty interesting. And FM, I would say, is probably the most accessible in terms of just the math that you'll have to do. I definitely recommend starting with that one. P is a little bit more involved. You'll have to do some multivariable calculus on that exam. By the time that you're passing P, you can do integrals in your head. It's really cool. Maybe. Okay. Then another thing that you really want to get started on right now is VEs. VEs, I think that stands for validation, by educational experience. Thank God it's on the screen. So what you'll have to do is essentially you'll have to take some courses in college that count towards your ASA credential. And those courses are, you'll need to take a macro and micro econ class. That's pretty standard. I'm pretty sure there's an actual place that you can go online and check which courses are actually approved to satisfy these requirements at your school. I am absolutely sure you have them at your school and they are approved. It's unbelievable how vast their network is. So many schools that are smaller than you would imagine are on that list. So econ, take some econ courses. Then you want to take some statistics courses. I think some of you are actually taking a statistics course right now, right? Good. So do some statistics. That's a really good thing, almost regardless of what field you go into. If you want to go in a field that's pretty quantitative, maybe STEMish, if you want to go in those fields, study your statistics. It's crucial. Understanding statistics is really crucial to being able to translate data and numbers into real consequences. Okay, so that's the second one. Well, they're not in any particular order really. And the last one is corporate finance. So that's probably going to be a little bit. I'm not sure if you have that here. Some community colleges don't really offer a lot of finance courses. So that might be something that you do maybe in your junior or senior year. Okay, then these core exams that are here in the middle, these are going to be the hardest in this whole series. These exams are going to be pretty difficult. MFE is Models for Financial Economics. Essentially what that is securities, like derivative security pricing. It's some pretty difficult stuff. I would say that's maybe the most challenging exam in the series, in the preliminary series, just because of the math you'll have to do. It's my favorite, my absolute favorite, and I use that stuff every day. It's really, really useful. MLC is Models for Life Contingencies. It's also a pretty good exam. It's very, very applicable to people who work in life insurance. It tells you all about how to value life insurance, how to reserve for it. Reserves are kind of capital requirements that states impose on insurance companies. So if you sell some policies, some insurance policies, then you have to, hold aside some capital to make sure that you don't become insolvent because of the claims from those policies. And those are very heavily regulated, and it's very, very important to, for insurance companies to stay on top of that. There's, the worst thing you could do as an insurance company is mess your reserves up, basically. And then exam C is construction and evaluation of actuarial models. This is a little bit more vague. It's essentially lots and lots of methods to figure out what you can do with the numbers that you've calculated in the other two exams, and how much you can trust those numbers, how much you can rely on them. Should you, kind of make adjustments to those numbers because they're maybe not that credible, that kind of thing. So this one's very, very applied. This one's a very applied, very, you have to kind of follow a lot of methodologies and stuff like that. But exam C is actually probably not as challenging as the other ones. You're not really finding any. You're probably not going to learn any. Like if you've passed MLC and MFE, in exam C, you're probably not going to learn any new concepts, which is really nice. You're just learning what to do with the things you already have. Okay, FAP is fundamentals of actuarial practice. This is again a very, very applied module. It takes several months. It's an online module. It takes most people, probably about half a year to get through that. You'll have to write some papers. I call them papers, but they're essentially you'll have to put together an actuarial report. So these are very, very useful because they actually teach you, kind of how to do your work as an actuary. Not just how to calculate stuff, not just how to figure out if the stuff you calculated is important, but how to present it to a client, how to make sure that your work is, in fact, kind of ethically presented and you're not misleading anyone on anything, and you're representing things, very accurately and concisely, and you're not introducing any doubtful things in there. And then this very last thing is this is probably the most simple thing to do. This is like a half-day course, I think, that you go to. That, talk about some important things, and then they stamp you and you're done. So that's one thing that people generally do after they finished everything else. You just kind of fly out to. They usually have it a couple of places every year, so you got to go to whatever location they have it in. You spend half a day there. You talk to a bunch of older actuaries and get to know them a little bit, and that's about it. It's more like a big party. Okay, so that's the ASA. Now the next thing that most people really want to do is they want to get their FSA, which is kind of the highest, most important thing you could do as an actuary. Many people actually equate an ASA with roughly getting a PhD in terms of the amount of work